Hi, my name is Mike Annis, and I'm with the Alexander County Veterans Committee. And today I'm joined with Glenn Mays, who was an Army veteran back during the Vietnam War. And Glenn, would you like to start this off by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, okay. I was born in 1944, so I was a World War II baby. But I was born in Catawba County because we didn't have a hospital here at the time. I live in actually out in Cornerstone, which is just off Lyle Down Road. But I grew up in the Ellendale section of the county, but I've lived away from here for probably 25 or so years of my life. But I've spent most of my time here in Alexander County. I'm a member of St. Luke Lutheran Church, and so that sort of sums up my biography, I guess.
Well, how did you end up in the Army? Were you drafted or did you volunteer? Or?
I enlisted. It was in 1966. I enlisted for 3 years, for a 3-year tour, and even had a guarantee of what I would do after basic training for at least for 8 weeks or 10 weeks, I guess it was, and that was to go to journalism school at the Defense Information School in Fort Harrison, Indiana, right outside Indianapolis. So, and then after I finished that, they decided to keep me as to go through the radio school, and I'd already had a little bit of radio experience before I went in. And following that, they retained me there for another 6-7 months as an instructor. So I had an opportunity to teach broadcast writing and television production.
Great. So you went in at an early age. Did you have a previous occupation that you left to go into service, or?
Well, I had been in college for a while, and also had worked in journalism for a while before I went in, and and I was able to use that experience in the military.
Mm. Were you married?
Not at the time.
No. Well, how long exactly did you serve?
I served 3 years and 1 day.
3 years and 1 day.
And I was supposed to get out at 3 years, but it didn't work out quite. I was the Augsburg Bureau Chief for Stars and Stripes in Germany, and I couldn't get back to Stuttgart, which was the headquarters for European Command, and we were Stars and Stripes was a single unit in the structure of everything. One little thing came off of European Command, and that was Stars and Stripes. But I was unable to get to Stuttgart on the day that I was supposed to get out, so I had an extra day in the military. But it worked out okay. I did take a European separation though, and traveled for about 6 weeks after I got out, and was able to visit some places that I was unable to do during my time in active military.
What was the highest rank you reached?
I was an E5.
E5. Did you do your basic training stateside, somewhere stateside?
Oh yes,
or?
I was at Fort Bragg.
Fort Bragg.
And that was I was in the second cycle, I believe it was. They just reopened the training center there, and I was in the second cycle of troops that were being trained there.
That was non-airborne. Right?
That was non-airborne. That's
yeah.
correct. Yes.
Yeah. What other bases were you stationed at?
Well, as I said, I was at Fort Bragg. After I completed basic, I went to Fort Harrison, Indiana, and was there for about 11 months in all. And then from there, I was transferred to Europe, to Germany. And for a little while, just a few months, I was at Hanau in the 2nd Support Brigade, which was a part of the 3rd Armored Division. But I guess I was there for 4 or 5 months, and then I was transferred down to Stars and Stripes. And for the rest of my time in Europe, I was with Stars and Stripes, which was a wonderful job because it was a civilian status job, really. I wore civilian clothes. They gave me a car to drive, and I lived in an apartment out in Augsburg. So it was really different from most people. Different from the experience that most people have whenever they're in the military. But it was really, it was fascinating and really very, very educational because I got to learn an awful lot about it. I was able to travel into 9 different countries while I was over there. And so I brought back a whole wealth of knowledge that I would not ordinarily have obtained. But it was a lot of fun.
Did you make any really memorable friends while you were in service
Oh, yes, absolutely.
that you keep up with and things?
Yes, as a matter of fact, just had an email from one who now lives in Pennsylvania. He was one of my students, as a matter of fact, and then he was transferred to Germany before I was, and he worked with the American Forces Network in Munich. And so once I got down to Augsburg, Munich and Augsburg are relatively close. They're only about 30 miles apart, I guess. And so we had a lot of good times there in Munich. And I've kept up with him. We've done a lot of things together. We've fished together, ski together. We've done a lot of different, had a lot of different experiences.
Do you have any particular superior officers you remember? And
Yes,
for
in
any
fact, I
any
do.
given reason why?
Yes, I do. When I went to when I got to Germany, they sent me over to the 2nd Support Brigade, and the gentleman that interviewed me to work in the Public Information Office there was a gentleman named John Schill. He was a 2nd lieutenant, and whenever he looked at my information, he looked at it and said, "Ah, January 15th, 44." And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "I'm January 14th, 44." So we sort of formed a bond just around our birthdays. But he talked to me a little while and asked me if I would like to work in the Public Information Unit there. And I said, "Oh, yes, sir." So, and I have also kept up with him, although I haven't talked to him in a few years now. But he was from Texas, and we kept in touch for a while, and for a long while, as a matter of fact. But yes, I made a lot of friends, and I've learned too. You know, the internet's a wonderful thing, but it also can bring sadness too. I've learned that some of my friends that I knew have passed away.
Yeah. Do you remember your drill instructor's name?
Yes, I do.
That's the one thing.
Herbert T. Akers, and he was from Youngstown, Ohio.
Every veteran in the world. I often ask, people, if you remember your 2nd or 3rd grade teacher's name. No, I don't. And you spent a year with them, but you ask them, "Do you remember your drill instructor?" 10 weeks. You never forget that
That's
person.
right.
That
I
person will
remember
forever.
I remember my company commander, Captain Coley. I remember him quite well. He was a good commander, and, as well as some of the other drill instructors that were in our company.
Now, you were in during the Vietnam period. Did you ever serve anywhere in the theater in Vietnam? Or?
No, I did not. I was sent to Europe, and that's where they needed me there. They said so. That's where I served. It's and I consider myself fortunate because people who serve in combat, my goodness, that's something that's really, really tough. I talked to a lot of folks who had been in Vietnam. In fact, one of the young fellows that worked at Stars and Stripes was a photographer, and he had been in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive in, I guess that was in 66, 67, in that era, or maybe it was in 68, whatever year it was. But he had experienced that, and he told me things that just were just awful. Of things that happened, and so I consider myself very fortunate that I didn't have to experience that. Although, if I'd been called upon, I would have done that.
Yeah. Well, did you? I know as being in the journalism field, Star and Stripe, you still had to go to the field every now and then, didn't you?
Well, going to the field as a journalist, yes, you did have to, but I didn't. I was not in an area where they had maneuvers a lot. I did have to go into the field. I recall one experience that I had, and that was the British Winter Survival School, and it was in Bad Kohlgrub, which is down in southern Germany there, not too far from Augsburg. And whenever I went down to cover that, and I was down there for about a week or week and a half, and about 5 or 6 days, well, it was snow. There was the snow was it was deep, and we had to walk. We had to walk out to the where they were encamped, and it was up to my it was up to my thighs. So walking, and we had to walk about 2 miles to get out to where they were from where we parked, and then we had to walk back. So I got my exercise in on those days. But it was quite an experience. Yeah, we went to the field. We didn't have to stay out there though. We didn't have to stay, but they of course did. But it was quite an experience. I had a number of experiences like that, and I also got I had the opportunity to learn an awful lot about World War II history. In fact, one of the places that I went to quite often was Berchtesgaden, which was Hitler's southern Germany retreat, and was able to tour the bunkers underneath the buildings there. Quite an experience, and those were bunkers that were unfinished, as a matter of fact, because the 3rd Infantry Division came through and rescued the people who were being used as, they were Italians that were being used as slaves to build bunkers underneath that. And the ingenuity of the Germans was just amazing, because there were bunkers that were in there that even they could take a direct hit from most bombs, not an atomic bomb certainly, but most of the bombs that we had available at that point. They were far enough down, and they were in rock, and there were rooms off of either side of the corridor, and it was they could also take they were protected from chemical warfare. The fans there were fans, and there were filters that would filter out anything that we would have thrown at them. So it really, I learned that was quite an interesting experience, or interesting education in what I learned about what the Germans could do. As a matter of fact, when I was in Hanau, the barracks that we were in appeared to be 4 stories, but we learned that they were actually 12 stories. There were 8 stories underground that had been used as munition factories and various other arms factories for the war.
It's remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. Yeah, they were quite ingenious in how they in what they could do. So.
Well, growing up in Alexander County, how did you handle being away from home and your family that length of period?
Well, it was not the easiest thing in the world, but it was also in talking with Mom and Dad before I left, and with my sister. It was one of those things that you had to do. Dad he was a World War II veteran, and of course he was away from home for a long time too. Of course, Mom, he was married at that point, and they were able to spend time together in Smyrna, Tennessee, was where he was based at the air base there. But in talking with them, we said, this is something that I have to do, and we'll be in touch. And we stayed in close touch. I wrote quite often. They wrote quite often. And we phoned occasionally. And that's how we did that. We were a very close family. And, I did my 3 years, and that was it. I mean, it was, we were able to get through that. Although my dad died a short time before I took my separation from the military.
Faith?
I did come home for that, of course.
Yeah. Did your faith play a good part in helping you cope with those times?
Absolutely. You know, we sometimes don't talk about that or don't think about that, but yes, my faith did. It provided an awful lot of sustenance for me that I couldn't have gotten anywhere else. You know, and that's very important for everyone.
Well, I take it from your stories that you were a bit of a history buff. While you were on leave, or did you get to tour anything other than right there in Germany around?
Oh yes, I was
Up and down the Rhine to see the castles and
oh,
stuff
yeah,
like that.
It was not just when I was on leave. A lot of times, if I was working, I mean, the Berchtesgaden thing. I was down there quite often because we had the Hitler area, the Hitler compound down there was an American recreation area. We had turned it into a recreation area, and that's where a lot of people went for conferences. But it was also a ski area. It was in the winter. It was a ski area. In the summer, where they skied, that was a golf course, and so people, you know, they went to that area because it had hotels and everything, and that's where they would have their meetings and conferences. And I had to cover a lot of those, so I was down there. So it was I had the opportunity to learn an awful lot about you know, the history during those times. But after I took my separation from the military, I did a lot of traveling in that 6 weeks. I guess one of the most, well, it was two really so memorable events or experiences that I had that just, you know, I still think about them often. One was I went up to Berlin and saw the Berlin Wall. It probably was one of the most, I don't know quite how to say that, but it was a remarkable thing because whenever along the wall on the west side, of course, there were platforms that you could climb up on. There's just steps up to them, and you stand there and you look over into East Berlin. Well, I did that, and the first place that I stepped up on the platform was at Potsdamer Platz, which was near the Hitler bunker where he died. But looking back at me was a machine gun mounted on a tracked vehicle. It was about 100 yards or so out in front of me there, and that will get your attention, definitely. And I wrote a letter home after that, and to my mom and sister, and I said, every American should have the opportunity to do what I did today.
I'll share that sentiment with you. I was fortunate enough that in my military career that I was over in Germany too before they tore the wall down, and I went actually through Checkpoint Charlie, in and out, and it's hard to explain to people. It's like actually walking back in time.
Oh, absolutely. Well, one of the things that I noticed when I went over, I spent, I think I was over there for 4 hours or so, 4 or 5 hours. And one of the things that I noticed, and somebody else on the tour bus that I was on noted the same thing, because I asked the question. I said, did you notice anything that was unusual about East Germany, East Berlin? And she said, yeah, nobody smiled. And it was true. Nobody smiled, except children. I could see children playing, and they were smiling and having a good time. They were children, but nobody else smiled. Nobody else. It was just it was an interesting experience, and one which I learned an awful lot. At that time, I was 25 years old, and at 25, you begin to learn an awful lot. The other experience that I had during that 6 weeks. Well, there was a couple of them. Another one. I went to Amsterdam, and I went to the Anne Frank Museum. And at that point, I had not read her diary. But while I was there on a Saturday, and after I went through, I picked up a copy of the diary, went back to my hotel, read the diary, and then went back on Sunday. And it was quite different. Mm-hmm. The two visits were quite different because then after I'd read the diary, I had a better understanding of what they experienced, of their experience there. Um, quite a, it's something, if anybody ever has the opportunity to go to Amsterdam, they should go through that. They should go through that.
I agree.
And the other thing that I did while I was during that 6 weeks too, I was in Luxembourg, but right outside Luxembourg City is an American cemetery, and I went out to visit there on a morning, and that was in an October morning, and you can probably imagine it was a beautiful fall morning, and I was the only visitor in the cemetery at the time. There were a few workers that were over to the side, but I was out there by myself, and that is quite an experience too. That also is a cemetery where George Patton was buried, and it was interesting. He probably would not like it, but he's buried aside from the rest of the graves, because he always insisted on eating the same food, doing the same things that the troops did, especially eating, because he said, how can I tell how far my troops can go if I don't have the same thing that they do? So, but anyway, that was an interesting visit there, and among others, many others that I had while I was there.
What have you done with yourself since you've left the service?
Oh, well, I had a career in journalism. I worked with 2 or 3 different papers. The last newspaper that I worked with was the Greensboro Daily News. I was a bureau chief for them for a while, and then a layout editor, and then the last thing I did with them, I was a business editor for the paper. And then following that, I went into public relations. The first job was I was the travel editor for the state of North Carolina with the Travel and Tourism Division in Raleigh, and I did that for 4 years. It was a wonderful job. That was one of the best opportunities I think I could ever have, because I had an opportunity to share with the world, literally, what we have in North Carolina, and we have so much. And I always said that the greatest asset that we have here is the people, and I thoroughly believe that. The people in North Carolina are wonderful. I've seen people in lots and lots of places. Can't find any better than in North Carolina.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Are you very active in any of the veterans organizations here in the county?
No, but I've had a lot of interaction with them. As a funeral director at Adams Funeral Home, I worked with the various groups in, for military honors at the graveside or in the sanctuaries or whatever. And I've not been really active in any of the organizations, although I have talked to some of them about joining. Yes.
Well, I think you should.
I just might do that.
What would you say to the youth today that might be interested in joining the armed forces? What would you tell them about that?
Well, I would say it's one of the best experiences that you could ever have, because you learn some things there that you don't learn anywhere else. I mean, you just don't have the opportunity to learn anywhere else. There is a responsibility or you learn what you are able to do. I think there's some spots on the one about Army Strong that's on TV now, or on even on radio, that I think it says an awful lot, because you learn, as a member of the military, you learn what you are capable of doing. And so often the military brings out those things that you probably, a lot of people don't think they can do, but they can. And I think that's, young people, if they're not sure what they want to do, that's one thing that they can consider.
And the training you got in the Army served you pretty well, too, didn't it?
Yes, I certainly did. I was, everything that I did it just sort of went in a progression.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from basic training, I learned how to kill. And that's
Mm-hmm.
and that's something that you know, you don't want to do that. I'd hope that we'd never have to do that, but yet war is one of those things that seems to be necessary at times. But we don't want to think about that. We'd rather that we have diplomacy.
Yeah, well, you were fortunate that you also had a skill that you could carry on into the civilian world, and you
Oh, true.
took it on with you
Yeah.
to the
Yeah.
up to your retirement. That's really great. That journalism is. I had several run-ins with journalists in my military time, but I
like
tell
the
you,
way you put it
I
there.
could not do that job. I mean, I don't think I could have done that. I mean, it's too intense for me. I mean, I was in the position I was in. I got to do a lot of extra stuff, but I mean, it was something different every day. There's a lot of tedium to that, and it's a very underappreciated field of endeavor.
Well, it's communications, and communication is one of the most important things in the military. Not only in military, I mean in life, period. If you don't have communications, what do you have a breakdown of what is going on. I mean, you've got to have, I mean, it's just like, well, for D-Day or for any other time, they set their watches, they communicate that it is down to the second, but that's communication. What you have as far as Stars and Stripes is a vehicle that they can communicate with all the troops and their families. And that's, you know, it's all about communication, and you have to communicate. Otherwise, you go off in different directions, and that's not productive.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't really realize that the Stars and Stripes, that magazine that come out, that weekly magazine, in a lot of places that was the only real news from home that you got.
Well, actually, it's a newspaper.
So yeah,
and it was,
that's what I say.
When I was there, it was a daily. It still is. It's a daily newspaper.
Yeah, it's come back as a daily newspaper. It was out for a longest time. It went to weekly, and then now that since we've gone back into the into what we call a war mode now it is a daily newspaper again for the last 10 or 15 years. It has been so.
Yeah, it's but it's it's produced by the Department of Defense and goes everywhere. I mean, whenever I was. Okay, it was centered or headquartered in Griesheim, Germany, outside Darmstadt, and it went to Turkey and Greece and Italy and Sicily and all over Germany and France and England. It was everywhere, and but it was to inform the troops. Yeah. And it also, I thought they had a wonderful philosophy about it too. That this is each troop's hometown newspaper, and usually that was a 2-year tour, at least a 2-year tour, sometimes a 3 in Europe, and in the whole theater. I mean, in these other places I mentioned. And so what they tried to do was that at least once during that 3 years or 2 years, whatever it was, I think 2 years, to have a byline, not a byline, but a dateline, which is the name of a town or city or whatever, that was every little nook and cranny of the United States, that there would be a dateline. And while I was over there, there was a dateline from Taylorsville, North Carolina. Yep. So we had, and I didn't write the story. It actually was an Associated Press story that we had. But really, we had a dateline from Taylorsville, North Carolina.
Well, that's great. Well, Glenn, I tell you, I've really enjoyed talking with you and getting to know you today. Thank you for taking this opportunity to share your story with the rest of the people in Alexander County and the veterans. And I want to thank you for your service.
Well, thank you, Mike. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Well, good.
As a matter of fact, I enjoy talking about my experience in the military.
Well, good. I'm glad you do.
Yeah, it was something that I certainly will never forget, and I learned so much from it.
Well, good. Well, thank you, Glenn.
Thank you.